Hey folks, this is Dennis Sullivan, and I want to welcome you back to the third workshop in our series where we are working on building a business plan and working through the steps on how to do that. First, we started with building a strategic plan. Then we talked about building a marketing plan. Now we're getting into the legal aspects, and we'll also be talking about the financial aspects of building the business plan. So be sure to check out those videos if you haven't already, but we're going to get into the legal workshop portion of it. Now, this could be a little scary for some, all right? Like my buddy Frank here, he gets a little scared when we start talking about this stuff, and he gets a little concerned. But, you know, Frank here, he, uh, he does get carried away sometimes. He gets a little concerned, his eyes start bugging out. Uh, but this is not something to stress over. There's some practical steps that you can take, and you don't need to lose your head over this stuff. So Frank does tend to get a little carried away, but seriously, this is not something to lose your head over. It's something that we can work through. We'll talk about it. So let me go to the presentation here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And I'll share my screen with you here. Bear with me 1 second. Got to bring Frank into the discussion. We have some fun with it. Got to have some fun with this. All right. So we are talking here about how the steps in the legal considerations as we work on our business plan, how you should set up your business. And there's some practical steps that you can take. I'm going to work through it with you so you can see all the different examples of different types of businesses that are out there and how you should set yours up and why. So we'll walk through the pros and cons of each so you can see it. And so you have a better understanding. So we'll look at some practical questions that you need to address as you start setting up your business. Who is making all the decisions? Who's the boss here? How are you going to raise money for your business? The capital structure, the decision making. How is that going to occur within the business? Are there other people who are going to have a say in how you run the business? And then we also need to figure out in terms of liability, if something does go wrong, who is responsible? How are you going to pay out the jelly beans, the profits? All right, at the end of the year, at the end of the quarter, each month, how is that going to be distributed? And then, unfortunately, as in anything, the only thing that's certain, death and taxes. What happens if a business owner passes away? What happens to the business as a result? So here's a worksheet that we're going to work through. And what I always encourage people to do is if you have the paper in front of you, to be able to fold it in half, because we're just going to work on first the sole proprietorship, limited partnership, and C Corp. And we're going to work through each one of those questions that I just addressed as to how that is impacted with each one of these legal structures for a business. So let's start. We're talking about who's the boss, who's the decision maker. Well, for sole proprietorship, the boss is that one person, that sole proprietor, making all the decisions. Well, that's part of the benefit, is that you only have one person who's making those decisions, nobody else. The downside of that is, well, it's only that one person making the decisions. So if that sole proprietor has a complaint about how the business is being run, well, they're going to have to look in the mirror, because it's only going to be them that one person who is responsible. Limited partnership, here's where you can bring in some other people, some partners. Usually the benefit of doing that is you're bringing people in who can complement perhaps either things that you're not willing to do or you don't have experience in. You often see this with legal firms, with attorneys or doctors. So they will In a legal firm, for example, law firm, they will bring in other attorneys who may have expertise in other areas that they don't. So they can continue to serve clients as part of that entire law firm for different types of needs that they may have. Same thing with doctors. So doctors may be specializing in one area, they bring in somebody who specializes in another area so they can continue to serve that patient with that one doctor's office. C Corp, now this is typically like you see with Apple, IBM, Ford, Chrysler, all these large companies that are able to raise money. They have stockholders who are investing in the business. So as a stockholder, you would be an owner in that company. The benefit for the owners of the company is they're able to raise a lot of money from other investors. The downside is that those owners, those stockholders, don't have a whole lot of say in the strategic vision of the company. For example, if we're investing in Ford and Ford is deciding to get out of the car business, they're just going to be making Mustangs. We can't say, well, we think that's a bad idea, and try to change the minds of the executives at Ford. As stockholders, the only say that we have is who serves on the board of directors. We vote on the board of directors. That's basically it. So there's benefits of that. The cons is that, well, you don't have a whole lot of benefit, or you don't have a whole lot of say in how the business is run. Capitalization for a sole proprietor can be very difficult because it's just that one person. You may have some savings, you may have some money put aside in 401k that you can access. Credit cards are usually a common way to raise money because nobody's asking you for a budget plan. They don't want any other money other than the interest earned on the loan that you're taking. So capitalization can be much more difficult with a sole proprietorship. Limited partnership, it can be a little bit easier, still a bit of a challenge because you have these other partners involved where they can contribute money and invest in the business. For a C Corp, excellent way to raise capital because you can simply issue stock where investors are buying the stock, and then you can use that money to invest, grow the business. And stockholders are obviously looking for a return on that investment. Voting policy for a sole proprietor, there's no voting policy at all because it's just you. Now for a limited partnership, well, you have other partners there, but they would have a say in the business as well. And that would need to be set up as part of the corporate structure. And sometimes that may be tied to how much money is being invested, would give you more votes, more weight in some of those decision making. For C Corp, the stockholders, they do have a vote, but that is just for the vote for the board of directors. That's it. And then the board of directors is overseeing one person in the company, and that's the CEO. They're involved in the strategy of the business, the mergers, acquisitions, things like that. But for the day-to-day operations, they're leaving that up to the CEO to run the business. So in terms of liability, something goes wrong. For a sole proprietor, this is the danger here. There's unlimited liability. There's personal liability. Even if something happens as regarding the business, then that person's personal bank account, their assets are at risk. So for example, I have a consulting business. If I were to get into a car accident as part of going on a visit with a client, I could be sued. I could lose everything as part of that if I'm found liable for that. Limited partnership, that just as it sounds, the liability is limited to the business. So the only thing that's really at stake here are the assets of the business, not personal assets. For a C Corp, so if you're invested in Apple or Ford or some other companies, you don't have any liability. You are not going to, if you're invested in Apple, Apple gets sued by Samsung, Samsung wins, you don't have to then pay any money to Samsung. That is, that liability is strictly limited to the business, not to the stockholders. And same with executives as well, unless they're found to be some type of criminal aspect to it, then they are not liable either. Profit distribution for the sole proprietor, they receive all the profits. It's treated just like personal income, like you would at another job. That income is then goes to you, goes straight to your bank account. And so the tax liability is as personal income. Limited partnership, partners are going to receive the profits. There may be a formula for how that is distributed, but it could be an even split among all the partners, or there could be some more weight tied to it based on how that is set up. For the C Corp, the earnings are paid to the stockholders in the form of the value of the stock. So if the value of the company is increasing, the stock is usually increasing as a result. So stockholders can then sell their stock after they've invested in it at a profit. So that's one way that they would be able to earn money from their investment. The other is if it's a slow growth company, for example, like Carrier, 105-year-old company, been in Fortune 500 for years, S&P 500 for years. They're not a fast growing company. So they would issue dividends. So it's a check that would be paid to the stockholders, knowing that they're not growing fast. So in return for their investment, the company may choose to issue a check to stockholders because there isn't going to be that huge increase in value of the stock like they could get with other investments. So taxation for a sole proprietor is treated as individual income. So the taxation is also treated as an individual. For a limited partnership, each of the partners would then be taxed as an individual. And then for a C Corp, there is the corporate rate that they would have to pay. And then there's also what's called a double taxation. So when the stockholders do receive that dividend check, then they have to pay capital gains. They have to pay a tax on those earnings that they're receiving in form of the dividend. Now, the life of the business, well, for a sole proprietor, if that person gets hit by a beer truck, well, then the business also dies with the owner. So limited partnership, well, that partnership would also die with a partner, but it could simply be restructured for the surviving business owners. But that person who is a partner would, if they cease to exist, then that original setup with the partnership would also cease to exist, and it would have to be a new agreement with the surviving partners. For a C Corp, it goes on. If the founder of the business passes away, well, the business continues to go on. When Steve Jobs died, who had founded Apple, well, the company continued to move along. So that gives us a good idea of the differences between a sole proprietorship, limited partnership, and C Corp. Now let's look at subchapter S corporations, nonprofits, and LLCs. So subchapter S's are usually very popular with car dealerships because you can get investors and not a whole lot of people can afford $30 million worth of cars to put on a parking lot. So they have investors who are able to contribute money to the business. Nonprofits, Navy Federal Credit Union is a nonprofit. United Way is a nonprofit. And so some different structure. And then LLCs, that has the best of both worlds, where you have the liability and the sole proprietorship that you would look for flexibility. And we'll walk through each one of these so you have a better idea. So for a subchapter S, it's a lot like a C Corp. However, the stockholders are limited up to 75 people. So great way for car dealerships to raise money that they may need to buy millions of dollars worth of cars to put on their lot. The capitalization, same as a partnership. So all those stockholders are essentially serving as partners in the organization. They have voting rights as stockholders, and the liability is limited to the business. There's no personal liability. Profit distribution, the earnings are attributed to the stockholders. And that can be divided up however they see fit. And taxation is similar in terms of it is treated as individual tax income. And then if somebody dies, a stockholder or the owner of the business dies, well then the business continues. It does not die with that person. So the key things to keep in mind here is subchapter S. You got stockholders up to 75 people, and it's individual taxation. Now for nonprofits, it's a little bit different. No one owns the entity. It can be a credit union, United Way. No one owns that. Capitalization can be difficult because you can be limited because the funds usually have to be used in certain ways by donors, by sponsors. And so it can be a challenge. You're always trying to raise money then to support your mission. Voting policy is you have a board of directors who have to meet at certain times of the year and keep minutes of the meetings. There may be some regulatory oversight as well for that, but there's a board of trustees then or board of directors who are overseeing the CEO, and the CEO is running the day-to-day business. The board is running the strategy and responsible for hiring and managing that one person, the CEO. Liability is limited to the entity. There's no personal liability. There's no profit distribution for a nonprofit. Basically, that money is then any profits would be retained by the entity and then redistributed within the entity to either put into a savings account, to purchase new equipment, hire new people, upgrade facilities, those sorts of things. So you're putting the money back into the entity to essentially support the mission. There's no taxation because it is a nonprofit. They're not generating a profit. You're only paying taxes on profits. So here we don't have any any profits to be taxed. And then if somebody dies on the board, the CEO dies, well, the entity continues to go on. So no one is owning the entity here, and you have a board of directors who are overseeing the business, or the organization. So you have a board of directors, trustees who are responsible for the direction of the organization. And there's no taxation for a nonprofit. Now, limited liability corporation, this gives you the best of both worlds, where you have the flexibility as a sole proprietorship, but you also have the liability protection, so you're not personally liable. So key things to keep in mind is that the ownership is the members. That could be like a sole proprietor, it could be one person, or it could be several people. The capitalization, same as a partnership where you're raising money from either yourself or from other members of the partnership. There's no minutes that need to be kept, no voting policy. It's up to the owners to determine how those decisions will be made. The key here is that liability is limited to the business. You don't have personal liability, and so your personal assets are not at risk. Profit distribution, same as a partnership, is treated as individual income. So the profits, you would be taxed as an individual, and depending on how it's set up, if you have partners, well then the business would continue if you die. If it's just one person who is owning the LLC, then the business would die with that person. So these are some things to keep in mind. Usually most businesses, when they're first starting out, it's easy to set up as an LLC. In Maryland, you have to pay a $300 property tax each year. And it's important to file that each year. That basically protects you and keeps your LLC alive. And it's basically an insurance protection is what you're paying for. And then there's an initial filing fee of about $150. It's easy to do. Just fill that out as articles of incorporation. It says who is the owner, your business name, and very straightforward. It's not difficult to fill out at all. And send that in, and you're on your way to creating an LLC. So this gives you a good overview of the different types of entities that can be formed for your business, and the benefits of and the cons of each. But most businesses, you just go right to an LLC, and that would probably be sufficient, and you can change it. So for example, I'm changing my business from an LLC to an S Corp. And so you can always change it, and you just have to refile with the state. So let me walk you through then the process for setting up your entity. So the first thing that you want to do is go to this website, egov.maryland, and they have a Business Express. They make it easy for you to set up a business. And one of the first things that you want to do is look to see if the name of the business that you're choosing is not already taken in Maryland. So it's important for you to start there and see if the business that you're looking to create, if that name is already taken, and you can easily do that at egov.maryland. What you also want to do is search for a URL that matches your business name, or it closely matches it. And one place we always recommend is register.com to do a search. It makes it easy to do that. And you can see if the name that you're choosing is already taken. Chances are, if that name is already taken and used in a URL, there's probably another business that is using that. So you don't want to create confusion by taking another business name that already exists. And you can also set up a name if you're not sure. Have like a global name, and then you could have other businesses underneath that. Give you an example. I was having a tough time coming up with my business name. My business name is Breakthrough Pros. But it took me a while to come up with that. It took me several years. So I started out as Dennis J. Sullivan, LLC. And that was the business name that I came up with. And then I have a URL, breakthroughpros.com. And so I'm doing business as Breakthrough Pros, but it's under the corporate name, Dennis J. Sullivan. Easy way to do it. Obviously, nobody probably has that. Nobody does. So it's easy for me to set that up. So don't stress out about getting the perfect name for your business. You can come up with a more generic name and then have other products and services underneath that business name as well. One of the most important things, though, is having a domain name that people can remember easily, that's short, to the point, and says or tries to say what you do. So that's the first step, is searching for a name with the state, also for a URL. Second step, now you want to go to the federal level to see if that name is already taken too. And so you can go to the U.S. Patent Trademark Office, uspto.gov, and see if the name is already taken. You can also look to see if there's any patents or trademarks around your idea, and you can do that at that website. Once you have a name that's not being used by somebody else in the state or on the federal level, and you have a domain that you like, well, now you go to step 3, file the articles of organization. So for example, if you're creating an LLC, this is where you would do that. And then you, as part of that, there's also an operating agreement. This is short and sweet for an LLC, maybe a little more complicated for some of the others. Then you obtain an EIN number from the IRS. That's basically like your Social Security for personal. This is the tax ID number for the IRS. Once you have that, then you can register your LLC with the state. And then the last thing you want to do is set up a business account for yourself. You want to keep your personal records separate from your business. It makes life a lot easier. So those are the steps in the process, and that you would need to follow in order to then create your entity. All right, next thing I want to get into is protecting your intellectual property, all falling under this legal aspects that we need to consider. And there's basically a couple ways to do that. You do that with a trademark, a patent, copyright, and then there's also trade secrets that are protected too within your business. But trademark, patents, copyright, we're going to focus on those 3 today. So trademark, this is going to be some type of mark, word, phrase, or symbol that you're going to use as a stamp, print, you're putting on your product, your website, services that you're offering. And the idea is that this trademark is distinctive, and it's going to differentiate you from competitors. So people easily see that and they recognize that and say, oh, that's your business. And it's differentiating you from everyone else out there. It could be a logo, could be the name of your business, or a tagline, can all be trademarks. And you do that with the uspto.gov, and you do that if that mark isn't already being used. So that's one way to see if it's already being used, is go to uspto.gov and also Google it. Go online, do a search, see if those names are already being used by somebody else. Now, if you have somebody else, let's say in another state, using your business name, or it's a completely different industry, that may be okay. That may be all right, because the whole idea with the intellectual property is to eliminate confusion. If you're starting a car detailing business and you have a name that you've assigned, and then there's another business out there that is doing irrigation and lawn, well, 2 separate businesses, perhaps in 2 different states, there may not be much confusion with that. So it may not be as much of a problem. But that's where the attorneys come in to help figure that stuff out. But if you want to keep it simple, find something that nobody else is using, and you won't have problems down the road. And so you have to also intend to put this into commerce, where you are doing business under this name within 6 months. So you can't just file with the trademark office, and then several years come back to it and then start to run the business. And then once you get that registration, you can use the R symbol that you often see showing that your name, logo, trademark, logo, name, or slogan are all registered with the Patent and Trademark Office. Here's some examples of different types of trademarks. So there's a fanciful trademark, and it's basically a made-up name that's been invented, and that's a great way to find something that nobody else is using. Just make something up. Kodak, Exxon, Polaroid are all made-up names. Never existed before, so they're not going to have much of a problem getting a trademark because these names never existed. Arbitrary trademarks, so these are words that have other meanings that are not associated with the product or service, like Apple, the computer company, Dove, soap, Shell, gasoline, all words that we use associate with something, but it's not affiliated with the actual business. Suggestive trademarks, so they're named after some sort of characteristic, like Jaguar or Microsoft, Netflix. You have a good idea of, based on the name, what that product may be. Descriptive trademarks, here we're actually describing the service or the product. Best Buy, good example. And then this one's crazy, generic trademarks. These are actually been so successful as a brand name that they lost their trademark status because it would be so commonly used, like Band-Aid or aspirin or Thermos. They are actually trademarked for years, but they became so successful that they lost their trademark because what else are we going to call that thing we need to put on a cut? An adhesive bandage, we know it as a Band-Aid. So they actually lost their trademark. So it kind of ironic because they spent years trying to get people to use it and associate with their brand. So another form of intellectual property protection is copyright. So here we're protecting creative works like artwork, photographs, books, blog posts, your brochures, your sales brochures. What's interesting about this is that it automatically attaches to a work as soon as it's created. As soon as it's created, you put it down on paper, it is copyrighted. You don't have to do anything else. Now, there does become an issue of, and let's say it gets into a dispute of, well, when did you create that? So I have some notes here on this piece of paper. This is copyrighted. But somebody could challenge it and say, well, when did you actually create that? So for years, my grandmother wrote songs, and she would write these songs, the lyrics, the music to it. And so what she did in order to copyright it, and a lot of people do this, she puts it in an envelope, puts a stamp on it, and mails it to herself. And then the government is putting a stamp date on it as to when that occurred. So there's an actual official stamping of the date of when that work was created. So that's an easy way to do it. But you could also file with the Patent and Trademark Office and file a copyright. And it does give you some certain legal advantages if the work is found to be infringed upon. And so you can recover some damages. It's cheap to do, $35 to $65, but that C symbol, that copyright symbol that you see, can also deter people from just go ahead and copying things and copying and pasting in a digital medium. So it can deter some possible copyright violations. So another form is patents, in terms of protecting intellectual property. So This is used for anything that's being made, used, or sold in the US, and it protects folks from taking an invention that without the owner's permission. And it's limited to the US, so not all countries follow these same types of legal protections. The inventions can include machines, manufactured articles, chemical mixtures, processes not previously available to the public. And that's the key, is that they have not been out there in the public before. There's a 20-year protection on those patents. And a lot of people do not realize this, but it protects those who are first to file, not the first to invent. So if you have an invention that you want to protect, it is worthwhile to go ahead and file that quickly. Now, the downside is if you do receive a patent, that invention then is publicly disclosed, that there's an invention that is coming. And so if you're trying to protect that, keep it a secret, that may be concern that you would want to address, because once you file that, it is publicly disclosed. Now, the invention itself, how you create it, process, that is not disclosed. So protecting your intellectual property can give you a competitive advantage. Your ideas obviously are an advantage in the marketplace. It's differentiating yourself. So it may be worth trying to protect that. But it's something to consider too, because if you are focused on protecting that, you're going to have to defend it. If there are violations, then you're going to have to challenge it. Because if there continues to be violations and you never challenged it, then you're not going to have as good of a case later when you really want to file a claim of infringement. So you have to defend against yourself. Interesting, when Under Armour first started, they did not file patents on their wiki type of shirts. This is an Under Armour shirt, very comfortable, but they never filed a patent on how they produce this. So Reebok, Nike all came out with very similar types of clothing. The reason why Under Armour chose not to do that was a strategic decision. They did not want to be constantly trying to defend and protect their property, their ideas for how this was made, because they figured other companies would figure out some ways around it and come up with something similar. So they didn't want to put all their money in defending that. Instead, they want to put their money towards more innovation. So while competitors were trying to copy what they're already doing, they were moving on to the next thing, and then the next thing. They're always trying to focus on innovation rather than defending old ideas. So these are some things to think about, and always recommend that you consult an attorney. So at CCBC, as part of our Center for Business Innovation, we have a whole network of resources to help you. We also have patent attorneys, intellectual property attorneys, copyright, trademark attorneys who can assist, provide some additional guidance. So this is all part of our business plan competition we host each year. And I know you're working through your business plans now as part of these workshops. And we want to encourage you to continue to develop your ideas. We look forward to continuing to work with you and provide some additional resources that you may need. We want to see everybody success and be successful. So every year we do our business plan competition, and we look forward to working with you. We want to see more businesses get started, supporting our local economy, creating jobs, innovation. We need that, and we want to encourage that even more. So if you have not checked out our other videos talking about the strategic plan, the marketing plan, developing your financial plan, please be sure to check those out, and we look forward to working with you. Take care.